Yeah, that's yeah, yeah, no doubt.
We have three. Four. We have three. Four.
Okay, well, good evening all. Welcome to the meeting of the Kennebunkport Growth Planning Committee. It's a May 10th meeting. It's actually an extra meeting for us this year in order to stay on target with being able to put a plan before you in November. So start off as usual with the introduction of member guests. I'm Dan Saunders. Werner.
Warner Gilliam.
Janet.
Janet Powell.
Paul.
Paul Hogan. Good evening.
Good evening. Jim.
Hello, James McMahon.
Hello. And Eli.
Eli Rubin.
All right. Thank you all. And see, we also have 2 attendees. So that's 8. I got the number right. Somewhere out there. So thank you all for attending. And for our meeting tonight, we will continue on with our review of the feedback that we have received from the different boards and committees. And I will turn that over to Werner or Eli to sort of lead us through that discussion.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. So just a recap, what we did last time. So we finished up with goals, policies, and strategies from before, and we worked our way through the Conservation Commission items. And let me just pull up our agenda here. So yeah, we worked our way through Conservation Commission feedback, and so we're going to pick up with Public Works Director feedback.
Quick question.
Yes.
We didn't really discuss any of the comments. We just listened to the Conservation Commission rep talk.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be better to actually deal with this now before we forget it? And I would assume we would do the same on Public Works. We either accept, reject, change. Is that the purpose of this?
Yeah, no, we can do that. Yeah. So what,
That's a good point.
want to go
What
back
was your plan?
to?
If there's a better way, let me know.
No, that works. That makes sense, Paul. Thank you.
All right, so let's pick up with the Conservation Commission feedback then. All
we
right,
go.
so can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yeah, a little bigger would be better. I'm looking on my own computer so I can read it, but
All right.
nice.
Okay, so as you noted, Paul, what we did at the last meeting, and we're fortunate that we had Carol in the audience with us, and so we just went through and had a conversation with Carol Morris from Conservation Commission, and so I think, you know, if you all have any comments here in terms of, you know, what's written here, or, you know, we're happy to take feedback from these items.
So on strategy 3, if I may start.
Sure.
I mean, my perspective is kind of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. The town has kind of left, thanks to the work of the trust, the acquisition of land to the trust, who's done an amazing job over 30 years, 40 years, I don't know how long. And so I thought I think they had a much more formalistic approach for any town when the consultants gave us the language on this, and then we adapted it to reflect the reality, excuse me, that the trust had always taken the lead and, worked with the town and buyers. And so I didn't really see that. I didn't really see that much of a role for the Conservation Commission in this. And I thought supporting them is kind of more appropriate. They have the expertise, the talent, the money.
So are you suggesting then that we leave the strategy as it's written?
Yeah. Yeah, that
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'd be interested
I mean,
in other feedback, but
ultimately, I think from the mechanics perspective, any kind of, once you start getting into written agreements and joint plans and things like that, you start getting into really who has the authority to, sign and deal with those types of agreements, depending on what exactly it is. And so that really then starts to think about other entities that you would have to deal with potentially. So, I mean, I'm certainly fine with the strategy as it was originally written. I mean, I think I agree with what you said in terms of the trust being in a good position to do what they're doing. So.
And Paul, from the trust point of view, and we'll get to the conservation trust feedback in a few items here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But they, I think, along the same lines as you're saying, I think are more supportive of terms like support and collaborate versus the type of formal or agreement/plan language. So I think they would support kind of the same idea that you're going for. So maybe, yeah. So
add collaborate then, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Support and collaborate with the Conservation Trust to protect blah blah.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, and I had asked, maybe I wasn't very clear when I was speaking to Carol about this last week, because I had the same concern when she presented it, that it was very detailed focused. And we were trying to write a strategy that provided leeways that you may want to have an agreement. Maybe that's what works, but maybe that doesn't work for both parties. And she was fairly adamant that they wanted to do the agreement piece. So I'm okay also staying with the text that we have, but then I guess I'll reach out to Carol to explain, because what I don't want to do is we ask these folks for feedback.
Right.
I want to provide feedback to them if we elect not to specifically use what they suggested.
What I kind of heard her saying is we needed to, the commission wanted to know what their role was. So they thought an agreement would do that, because it's unclear. I mean, the Conservation Commission is mostly new people.
Yeah.
So it was unclear, I think, whether they had a role, whether they thought they had a role in this or should have a role in this,
Right.
etc. But anyway.
Yep. So I think we can leave our strategy as is. And if they really feel that an agreement is the important piece for them to make that work, I'm okay with that. But I think that can be outside of the plan. And
we have a member. We have a member of the Conservation Commission on tonight, a different member. So we can just, if there's anything that we change, they can certainly raise their hand.
Sure. Thank you.
So at the moment, I've just inserted the word, and collaborate with, and then, kind of reverted back to that original strategy. So that's going to be how number 3 reads.
Okay.
All right. So we can move along then to number 4. And this was you can see the language here. Conservation Commission had suggested the conducting of a national resources inventory in order to prioritize conservation, allocation of resources, and so forth.
Looks good to me.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think we're good with that, with the combining of number 5.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Good suggestion.
Oops, sorry about that. All right. So the next, number 6, collaborate with conservation partners to identify and make public regional database of educational resources and information on critical habitat, vulnerable species, impacts of development, human activity on natural resources.
So there was no change, that it was just an asterisk, which I
Yeah.
forget what that meant. That mean, that was that
That
their
was-
priority?
It was, I think, yeah, that's right. As I recall, the asterisks were things that they, that they felt were important or that they placed a priority on.
So we keep it the same.
Yeah.
Well, it's slightly different.
Oh, I tried to read it word to word. It looked the same.
Nice.
Yeah, after the "and" in the first sentence, they changed
Oh, yeah, to
make the
identify
public
and make, yeah.
versus compile a publicly accessible data.
Sure.
So
Thanks.
that's fine. I'm okay with their change.
All right. Moving on. All right, so then 11 looks like, yes, so we had this was to conduct a monitoring to evaluate the impact of pesticides and herbicides on natural resources.
Hey, Werner,
Uh,
what's above that though? The policy, are they suggesting a different strategy? I can't remember. Next to minimize the impacts in the policy, there's another asterisk.
Yeah, this one here says create a process for general oversight of development activities in order to successfully prioritize natural resources conservation as described in strategy 4 above. And that's in with this natural resources inventory piece.
Is that a replacement policy?
I think I'm just looking back on some notes from that. We had kind of thought, I think that was the commission recommendation to create a new item with that, but it seemed like that was already what Planning Board, DEP, and Army Corps kind of already provides that process. So I think we didn't find really another way that or much value to include that. So I think that's maybe why we just skipped over it. But that's what I had in my notes here, but we can talk about that.
So can you flip the screen back one, Werner?
Yep, to that one there.
Just seeing if what they wrote there is a strategy that fits under that policy 2, number 2 there, or is that a new strategy to put? I don't see it as a policy so much.
Yeah, I think it was meant to be a strategy under policy number 7. So under minimize the impact of development, it would be create a process for general oversight. And we felt that it basically is what already happens.
Okay, so we'll go to 11.
Yep. So 11 is the conduct monitoring to evaluate the impact of pesticides and herbicides on natural resources and water resources. Identify strategies to minimize impacts such as thorough alternative weed and pest controls and regs as needed. And so they had some comments there in terms of, whether or not that was something realistic to monitor at the town level. And then
Yeah, I strongly disagree with the comment. There is no testing currently. There isn't any national or state data available for our waters. Many improvements have been done north of us in Casco Bay because there are like 10 towns that are doing this kind of testing. But, and I think they're doing that testing in the Kennebunk River as part of that study. But we don't test our rivers, our bays, our anything. So I think it's an aspirational thing. It certainly maybe doesn't belong with the Conservation Commission. And it's certain they have no budget and, but for example, there are lots of like 2 or 3 weeks from now, there's a citizens day in all of Casco Bay where they're asking people to take water samples so they can measure the nitrogen levels. So they'll have, 100 volunteers, 200 volunteers testing nitrogen levels to see what it is. If you don't test, you don't know. Maybe we have no problem. Maybe we do. So.
So you'd like to stay with the original strategy?
Yeah, I mean, the lobstermen are screaming about the black stuff on their lobster shells, and they, it's impacting, in my view, and in the view of the lobstermen. We don't have the science to show it because we're not doing any testing, but they think that's what's causing it.
So where should this go? I mean, and if they don't have a budget, and they can certainly ask for a budget.
Right, they could.
Right? I mean, that'd be part of this.
Sure.
I think, but I think the idea is that they wouldn't come from their budget as much as they might be able to provide guidance around what's relevant to be studying or what are the parameters, and the planning department would be the kind of primary oversight.
Yeah. No, and I don't disagree with what
for this. Do we have like anything there with a regional effort? To me, this seems like we're not the only coastal town, and I would assume I'd rather see some kind of a regional effort where we can collaborate with other towns to make this effort possible.
Well, I think
that could be done completely within the strategy.
Right. I'd rather. I don't think this solely should go on the taxpayers of Kennebunkport. We should try to do a collaboration with this.
Yeah, I mean, Casco Bay, they raise funds from private citizens to fund the whole testing effort. And they've been very successful at that because people are very concerned about it. And people donate every year. This isn't saying the government has to pay for it or which government or anything. It just says.
So if they're leading the charge, what can we do to somehow steer people to work with them then?
So ultimately, and I think, and this is, Paul, just correct me if I'm, misspeaking about what I've heard you say, but, it's difficult to develop some type of metric or performance standard to govern an activity unless you've got some data to go along with it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think what we've seen when you look at communities that have different herbicide and pesticide regulations, they vary pretty broadly across the different communities. Like there's not necessarily kind of a here's the standard sort of policy or regulatory practice that all communities deal with. Now, you can argue about how that came about and who's done what, but, I think what I heard Paul say is that you've got to have some data. It helps to quantify something with data, before you develop a standard, and part of this strategy, I think, is to do exactly that, is to do some of the water testing to compile some data.
Better said than me. Thank you, Werner.
Yeah.
And I think that's just where you start.
Exactly.
And then go from there.
So that strategy would be exactly what Paul says. We should do an outreach to that organization to see how they can help us.
Well,
collaborate on water samples.
So there is, we did include a potential other language here where it says revised to say, and I think what we tried to do there, and maybe this is going to address your concerns, is, we just made it a little more broad to say identify strategies. And so that, is going to include conduct monitoring, but that may be regional, that may be with partnerships, that may be privately. I know one thing that I learned from talking with the folks at South Portland who have been doing this for years now is that both, yes, you can monitor locally, but also that, the chemicals in water bodies act the same everywhere. And so you can also lean on regional and national data. And so I think that was part of the reason that we trying to broaden it to say, yes, it can be monitoring, it can be whatever it is. But anyway, I'm just throwing that on because I'm not sure if other people noticed that there was that alternative language there.
Well, and I'm reacting to two things when I say this. One, as Werner just stated, without data, it's very difficult to know whether you have a problem or not. And so I think the monitoring piece of it is a first step. And the second reason I say that is I jumped in and out of Conservation Commission meetings in the past few months where they have been discussing this topic, and the people who are against any regulation, the chief argument seems to be there's no data. Why would you do this? There's no problem. So it's a kind of a response to that, as well as, my common sense would say, start to solve a problem by finding out whether you have a problem.
But to appease them, we need to have an alternative. I said we need.
I can't hear you, Jim.
Jim, you're breaking up.
Can you hear me now?
A little better.
Oh. So, but to appease those folks that are against it, we need to find alternatives. I'm just making. I brought this up before. I want language in here where we're advocating and find alternatives to, the harmful chemicals.
I think it already says that, Jim, and identify strategies in the original language to minimize impacts through alternative weed and pest controls and regulations as needed.
Good.
I think it was trying to cover all bases.
Yeah.
And there's an as needed
And
after the regulation part of that.
Right.
There really shouldn't be any. I mean, if we're doing that, if we're allowing that to happen, the folks that are against it, I don't know what to tell them.
Well,
you got to have the data before you develop a solution.
True.
So
No, absolutely, I agree. Yep, you're right.
yeah.
I mean, if
And-
we find
and the
out that it's not
strategy-
harmful, then, so
The
that's
strategy
what it is.
doesn't say, we could have said, and we discussed this, but then this was the language we agreed on, that we were not saying there has to be a regulation. We were saying, consider strategies, find out whether there's a problem, and then consider strategies. And then we identified some of them. We could have added.
Does
Sorry.
it make sense to have them elaborate a little more? I mean, as to why it's unrealistic to monitor at the town level? Like what are they?
Well, I think I think more I would say the unrealistic piece, or the part that's, a little bit more difficult to manage is an ultimate enforcement of a practice. Okay. That's, I think, is the piece that's,
Is that what that means?
is, I think so. I
But
mean,
we're not talking about that at this point.
we're not talking about that. I mean, testing is, we know how to test water, there is, I don't think it's inexpensive to test for herbicides and pesticides. And we're not getting into that in this piece here,
Right.
But I think it's the next step, that you go beyond that. So let's assume that you find, unsafe levels of pesticides and herbicides in your waters, that then takes you to the next step of what kind of a regulatory, standard do you develop, and how does the mechanics of that work? And I think that's the part that, starts to get a little bit tricky to figure out how you do that effectively. So
Thankfully, we don't have to
that's
figure
okay.
that out.
Yeah,
But
the strategies. Let's remember that we don't want to solve all the details here.
right.
Correct.
We want to frame the concern, provide enough details from the strategy so that we do conduct the monitoring. We don't skim over it, but at the same time, we let the people who get assigned it the freedom to figure out how to solve it. And I'll just remind folks, we were half hour into this meeting. We're barely through a little bit of this review, and we've got a lot of work to do before the end of May. to get this in front of the selectmen. So let's try not to get down into the weeds too far. Bring something up if you got a big concern, but let's not get too far into the weeds. Just make sure the strategy covers what you're talking about and can be dealt with by the group that ends up assigned the work. Thanks.
So shall we go back to the old strategy, and I can change so that planning department is the first party listed,
Sure.
and then call it good?
Right.
How does that sound?
I think that's good. I think the Conservation Commission can help just with the communication and education.
Great.
Okay. All right. Next strategy was collaboration, educating the public about rare and endangered species. And this was collaboration with regional conservation partners to develop education outreach to inform the public about presence of endangered, rare, and significant species and how to avoid impacting them. I mean, I think these strategies are very similar in terms of that language. And again, I think that's the educational side is one of the things that the commission has prioritized.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's go on.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Coordination with the Kennebunkport Conservation Trust as far as trails. It says, you know, KCT does an excellent job. Unclear whether the town should be involved as we have no trails. Any needed collaboration could be spelled out. Yeah.
If that's true, we have no public trails. Then probably we don't need the strategy.
Yeah, I mean, the town does, you know, there are trails that are on, you know, that do cut across town-owned property, you know, but those have been done in conjunction with the Conservation Trust.
Yeah. I'd leave the strategy in place.
Yeah.
So while we're here, I can just juggle back and forth to the Conservation Trust, if that's okay.
Great, thank you. Save time.
Yeah, because they might, I think their strategy might make sense here. So let me just make sure how this is number 26 under maintain and enhance. Yeah.
Yeah.
So their recommendation was coordinate with the Kennebunkport Conservation Trust to interconnect public and private conservation lands and trail systems, including links to routes and facilities in neighboring communities.
Sure.
Thought that kind of took a nice thinking on it, and yeah. So that sound good?
That sounds good.
Mhm.
All right, moving along. We have this review use of town-owned conservation lands. We didn't have any changes there. Periodically review the use of the town forest, seek input from residents on permanent protection of town forest properties. I think they just have that starred as a priority there. Oops. All right. Providing access to conservation land. They had some questions here, you know, and this talked a little bit about, you know, as far as access, public access via ADA compliance. Eli, was there what was the trust strategy on this one?
So the trust thought about this one quite deeply, and I think they kind of came to a nice final wording on it. So I'll read that to you. Coordinate with the Kennebunkport Conservation Trust to inventory and improve as needed parking, access, and trails at conservation land that is open to the public. When appropriate, support the KCT as it works towards improving accessibility to a range of users, physical abilities, and activities. So, you know, notably, they noticed right away that the ADA compliance is a very significant standard, and it would totally change the kind of character of the trails. And so instead of calling out that standard specifically, just kind of calling out what the intent was, And then I think they added the word when appropriate. And I think this committee has discussed also that the idea isn't to put trails everywhere, it's to put trails in land where it's appropriate. So
I'm good with their language.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then since we have the next one is also a conservation trust one, strategy 31.
all right, let me just get down to it. Oh yeah, this was a great one. They talked about this one for a lot too. So their final language suggestion was form a committee to investigate opportunities to balance protection and enjoyment of natural resources with tourism and recreational opportunities.
That's better than pair.
Yeah, they were quite worried about that and thought, and I agree, that makes a lot more sense. So
All right, so we'll move on to the next page here. Now, do you want me to talk about all of these ones here or just the ones where we have notes?
Just the ones where we have notes.
Okay, all right. So we'll look at number 40 here. Continue invasive species management and prepare to manage new invasives. They suggested create and implement a town invasive species management policy and prepare to manage new invasives. I think
Werner, we had suggested on my little note sheet here to clarify if we were talking about just town-owned properties.
Right.
So maybe that's something we want to clarify here.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that we were gonna suggest that we add in here, that this is a management policy for town-owned property.
Right. Unless you want to help me with my Japanese knotweed.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is town-owned property.
Yeah.
Well, educating homeowners about invasive species would seem to be something that we should be involved with, because what happens on private land goes to public land and vice versa. It's not isolated. And many people are just completely ignorant and say, oh, look at that beautiful red berry that's climbing up my spruce tree and tackling it. But it looks so nice in the fall.
Better space.
Yeah, you got it. So if this is the only place we talk about that, and I just don't remember, I would think we should, the town policy for town land is one thing, but an educational effort for the rest of us would be a noble thing to do, and something I would think the Conservation Commission would be interested in doing. Not that they're going out to remove it from my yard, but that they would provide guidance and maybe a brochures or whatever.
Yeah.
Or best time of year to do this stuff, all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm just kind of skimming through to see if I can't find other places that are mentioning it. So it's mentioned one other time under water resource protection. There was a strategy to include a one-page summary of resources and links to information on water quality, best management practices, and pollutants, including invasive species, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, we have that here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's not really related to.
Yeah. So if you want, we could. So that here's a strategy as I've just written it here, and then we can add to it. So create and implement an invasive species management policy and prepare to manage new invasive species for town property. Could we make the invasive species management policy something that includes public outreach and education?
Sure.
Would that be something that?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's definitely acceptable to everybody.
So after policy include comma,
Yeah.
Right.
What do you want me to write? Include public outreach and education?
perfect.
Yep.
All right, give me just a second. So it'll say create and implement an invasive species management policy, including public outreach and education, and prepare to manage new invasive species on town property.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, thanks.
All right, so then.
Why don't we, the lawyer in me says now we've made it a little confusing with that second part. So I think if we got rid of new and just
Yeah.
say, and manage invasive species on town property.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's not like, we don't need to sit around and wait for a new one to show up.
We got a plan, but there's nothing new.
I don't know. It's the same 6 ones we've been looking at, right? Yeah. All right, moving into water resources. Looks like we just had a comment that they were happy to provide support, but did not feel that they should be the lead.
That's fine.
Yeah.
What was that for strategy 4?
That was just a general statement for the, so you had 2 here. You had this collaborate with City of Biddeford, which we'd gone over. And then this one, coordinate with the district to protect regional drinking water resources.
Yeah, they shouldn't be the lead.
I mean, this is something that the water district, manages on their own, to begin with. And, at this point, the town and we don't provide a source for KKWD. So, the Branch Brook Aquifer in Kennebunk and Wells is a big source. There's numerous wells also that provide water to the district. And then there's also the Saco comes over from the Saco River, also supplies water. So, I mean, I think it's a fine strategy, but it's not, we don't have any of, we don't supply any water to the district in Kennebunkport.
Okay.
Next, this inclusion of a 1-page summary of resources and links. I think as we talked about here was just recognizing we're dealing with the website. And so I think we just removed the 1-page summary language here.
Yeah.
Good.
All right. Moving on here. Protect and support the marine resource industry. And so the comments here under monitor and protecting eelgrass from pollutants, particularly nitrogen. Again, Conservation Commission just commenting that the monitoring was outside their purview and that the eelgrass was protected by DEP and Army Corps. And wasn't sure what town action needed to be identified here.
Who would be the resource if the DP and the Army Corps wanted to contact the town? It'd be the planning department, right?
As far as this is concerned here, as far as,
Right.
So we wouldn't necessarily be the first point of contact. If there was a pollutant issue, for DEP, usually their first point of contact is going to go through Public Works or the town manager's office. And then we obviously get roped into a lot of that communication, if there is, some type of a particular discharge, but that's normally, the communication goes through the manager in Public Works.
Okay. So should they be listed here then? I mean, 'cause it's really going to be more, I mean, there's nothing that we're actively going to do here, right?
Yeah, and I think actually I have a note here that maybe to even consider removing it if you felt like in number 15 it would basically already be covered if we're talking about pollution from nitrogen.
Yeah, I think that's the concern, isn't it? The
Yeah.
Eelgrass.
Right. So
Right.
I
That's
think
right.
just get rid
Nitrogen.
of strategy 14.
Yeah, maybe just add.
I mean, you could remove strategy 14 and because that's covered, the same intent's covered in strategy
Right.
15.
To help protect eelgrass,
Right.
Something to that extent. So you get the eelgrass covered in there.
Yeah, so if you want to include, we could say something about eelgrass habitat or something in
Yeah,
number
exactly.
15.
Right,
Yeah. That's
That
right.
makes sense.
In that nearshore waters.
So I'll just say into nearshore waters and eelgrass habitat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
By expanding the town sewer service area and regulating the use of fertilizers. And then we will get rid of, remove strategy 14.
Right.
And then
Should-
maybe have PW as the lead on that, right? And CC.
Yes. Yeah.
Shouldn't we take the same strategy that we just agreed to on testing before regulation so that we don't get
Well,
and
Right.
regulating as necessary kind of thing?
well, yeah, I mean, these are two different items, really. I mean, the regulating the use of fertilizers isn't something that's going to fall under the purview of Public Works.
Yeah, true.
And so, I mean, I think we've covered that topic
Yep.
under a previous strategy, but
Yep.
but it's not one, to tap in the sewer service and the fertilizer usage does feel like two different issues.
I agree. So why don't we strike that
Mhm.
part?
Strike what part?
And regulating the use of fertilizers, because we do have that covered. We spent 10 minutes on it in the beginning.
Okay, so then it would be revised to read, reduce the flow of nitrates into nearshore waters and eelgrass habitat by expanding the town's sewer service area.
Okay. As long as fertilizers is covered in the other one, that's fine.
I went right.
Some
Okay.
people think of that as a whole different.
Okay.
All right. So move on to the last piece here. Oh, no, maybe not, but this maintain cooperative agreements with Rachel Carson Refuge staff to develop a program for management and education.
Which we discussed and agreed
Right.
there were none.
Correct. Yeah.
Develop. We need them? Do we need any?
Well, I mean, it's, the refuge for sure has educational resources. I think, it's as much about, potentially maybe publicizing the existence of their educational programs that they have. I mean, we've talked a lot about in the previous strategy, we had a lot about, promoting the resources, educational resources that are available.
Yeah.
I wonder if if this is part of that.
Yeah, and the suggestion, the water quality testing for healthy beaches doesn't really, that's a beach program. It's not really a protected salt marsh. It's not a salt marsh issue. We don't test there except when we have problems and we convince the state to go farther. and
Yeah.
support us more.
Yeah, sorry, I just threw these in. These were
Oh, okay.
these are not connected to this goal or policy. These were just
Yeah.
kind of additional comments that they had. And it's only because, we do have the continue to support Maine Healthy Beaches program strategy, but it wasn't included in their digest. And so they were just kind of checking in on that. So that one should be all set.
So that one's covered? Okay.
That one's covered. The next one, the create educational materials, again, I think that I guess the question would be, how different is this from number 19, which we had discussed a little while ago? This is what used to be include a one-page summary strategy that's on the page before.
Was that talking about septic systems though? This is pretty specific.
Yeah, this is salt marsh, which is a very different.
Yeah.
Well, so again, this wasn't
I mean-
specifically for salt marsh, but if what we want to do is include it into salt marsh, then that's something we could do.
Or could you just take this strategy here, this educational materials, and, assess the need for regulations to promote regular maintenance on private sector septic systems, especially within river watersheds. I mean, we could change that to say within areas adjacent to salt marshes.
Yeah.
And have that as the replacement strategy under this policy.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think on Rachel Carson, it wouldn't be bad to find out what they're doing and get their educational materials and take advantage of that. So I think there's some sense, I would have a sense that we should have something about Rachel Carson since they own so much land and so much of our salt marsh in town. I think separately, what you just suggested, Werner, is another strategy, and I would, why not do that?
Yeah.
And like the beach committee this summer, I'm working on a program to get a UNE professor to talk about the salt marshes because it's, it's a sensitive area we live in down here at the beach, and so it's an educational program that is available to us, and we should create or take advantage of.
Okay, so would we be adding a strategy that would read, create educational materials and assess need for regulation to promote regular maintenance on private septic systems, especially within areas adjacent to salt marshes? And that would be included under this policy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'd suggested just taking that and making that the strategy, since we don't have this cooperative agreements piece.
Okay.
So Werner, who does the salt marsh measuring? You see people out there taking elevations, checking dimensions. Is that anything to do with Rachel Carson, or that's some state, some other state?
That's a good question. I don't know specifically who's doing that measurement, whether that's something that's done through the state, or if that's Rachel Carson just in terms of monitoring their own properties. I
think I've seen state trucks over the years.
Yeah, that could be the Geological Survey.
No, it's not them. Inland Fisheries?
It might be IF&W,
Okay,
I think, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Well, I guess I'm just a
That
little
makes sense.
unclear still. So the idea is that we're going to remove the current strategy and replace it with the one about septic systems?
Well, my perspective is septic systems are part of the problem, but they're not the only threat to the salt
Right.
marshes. They're
It almost looks as though there could be more work done. I hate to say that, but I would think you could have 2 or more strategies for this particular policy.
Well, and keep in mind,
Not
I
to
think
make the job harder, but I mean, I thought we were going to keep 35 and just add the stay connected with Rachel Carson Refuge staff to be made, to stay aware of programs for management and education and share with the public, something like that.
Well,
Because it was a good connection.
yeah, at the meeting, the last meeting, which I don't think you were at.
I don't think, no, I wasn't.
We
there.
realized there weren't any cooperative agreements, so we had to change that part of that.
Right.
strategy.
I'm not talking about a cooperative agreement, but use Rachel Carson Refuge, the programs there
Right, and the resources.
and their resources. That's all. Maybe it seems too simple, but I think it's a good connection.
Yeah, it is. And I think, where we have further in a past policy where we talk about essentially the collection of resources. I mean, Rachel Carson is one of those resources, and I would anticipate that you would see, here's a link to Rachel Carson Wildlife Reserve and their resources that they have.
So you think it's pretty much, it's in there already?
I mean, I think this gets a little bit into the minutia of starting to call out specifics.
Right.
I mean,
I don't want to do that.
if we're going to keep it general, I think, again, they're one of those parties.
So what are we saying? Get rid of that 35 and just put something in about, the policy is educate the public about the value and need.
Exactly.
So what's the strategy? Educate the public about the value and need?
So then
Yes. I think it's a good one. Educate the public on the value of salt marshes. That's simple enough. They could use the Rachel Carson, whatever it may be. And then have the second one be about the septic systems specifically related to salt marshes.
Okay.
That gives us two strategies for an important topic. Does that work?
Yeah.
That work for everybody?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, great.
Cool.
All
That's
right.
it.
And that's
One
it.
Where to go?
All right. So let's go to Public Works.
Do you want to, would you want to actually just go to the Conservation Trust? Because we're basically through all of it.
Good
Got it.
idea.
And while it's just on people's minds.
Yeah,
I just
pretty
wanted,
good. That's pretty good for COVID brain there.
Yeah, good job.
All right.
Get us back on schedule.
so let me just see.
All right. So we've got that one. Hang on one second. I need to stop share for a second. This funky little drop down wasn't helping me out any.
So I'll just comment while we're just getting it set up that I went and took comment from during one of their board meetings, and they were very appreciative of kind of being provided the opportunity and just wanted to extend a thank you and express kind of goodwill and encouragement at the collaboration that that this plan was and that this plan kind of talked about between the Conservation Trust and the town. So so just passing that along, there's a big thanks there.
Eli, thank you for going and encouraging that cooperation.
Yeah, they were right on top of it. They had really insightful things to say. So they're definitely a good partner of the town. So
all right. Yeah, so I think the only thing I see changed here is instead of just islands, it says area.
Well, the screen, the screen hasn't been shared. We're still back on the agenda.
Okay, so you're not seeing.
Yeah, I think you might have only shared your PDF viewer instead of the.
Got it. All right. All right. Let's go back to. All right. So can everyone see Conservation Trust?
Yep.
Okay, great. So this one, support Kennebunkport Conservation Trust in its efforts to preserve the sites of historic European fishing settlements and Native American use of the Cape Porpoise area. Yeah, so they just minor tweak to that.
Yeah.
Great.
Number 3, support.
So we've and now we've changed this one already. So
Okay. Yep, that's right. We changed this one already. Yeah, and so these ones are already ones that we've already changed because they were Conservation Commission joint goals.
I think it's just down to transportation.
Yeah. Okay. So
yeah, they just wanted to be clear about that. So there's no false
and this
hopes or
is
promise.
Yep. So the goal was develop a long-term vision for a network of bicycle routes to serve the community and link to routes and facilities in neighboring communities. Yeah, and their comment was, to be clear, no trails currently can serve this purpose, but KCT would be interested in working with the town for a long-term plan. No, I think that's good feedback for that.
So the language is fine.
Yeah, just some feedback on that. And then in collaboration with then this is preserving Kennebunkport's open space and rural character. In collaboration with a conservation trust, identify goals in the process for land conservation, planning for climate change effects, and present recommendations to select board. And so we were just adding the Conservation Commission to this and removing the planning board from that.
And I think, and this was the kind of the comment I made when we began about focusing more on the term collaboration than on the formalization. But they are genuinely very excited to be doing this type of work with the town. I think independently. So it seems like a pretty good match.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and then I think this was this last note, and I thought that this was a good one here, adding the Conservation Trust to the marine resources strategies, since a lot of the islands and adjacent areas are likely they're all trust held properties to begin with. So that was a good comment.
On to Public Works.
Great.
All right.
Nice
We're
job.
going to stop that one.
Thank you for the feedback, Conservation Trust.
And going to go on to Public Works.
Nice.
All right, Public Works. So goal here, ensure adequate municipal office space and tech for town government related services. So this was talking about facility needs. And so, yeah, the strategy that we have here is continue to consider facility and staff needs assessment to be kept up to date with current staffing and future needs. And I think, this is good general language across all of the, across all of the boards here.
So we're just adding continue. It's an ongoing thing.
That's
okay.
right. It is
continue to consider. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, it is an ongoing thing that departments look at.
I think it also included the word staff. That was it. Facility and staff needs.
Right. Correct. Yeah. Next strategy, work with, so this is under the goal of protecting rare and endangered species under the policy of educating the public. This strategy is work with Maine DOT and Kennebunkport's Public Works Department to accommodate known migratory crossings of endangered reptiles and amphibians as part of road construction and repair projects. And they just added here to continue to place caution signs at appropriate sites. So just recognizing that that's already an ongoing strategy. All right, so moving along, you still just want me to focus on the ones with the comments?
Please.
Okay. All right, so goal, protect quality and quantity of water resources. Policy, protect water resources from the impacts of development, reduce potential of water quality degradation. And so suggested language change here. This is dealing with, winter road maintenance. And so there's Public Works has suggested languages here is to continue to follow best practices that achieve a balance of low salt application with roadway safety.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on, add up to the impacts of climate change. Minimize the impacts of climate change to wastewater resources and wastewater infrastructure. So that's just a change to just wastewater infrastructure as opposed to just water infrastructure.
So how do we deal with? So that's good. I mean, see, that's what they're not responsible for the water side.
No, they're not.
That's
Right.
correct. Yes.
But
Yep.
then we need. So how do we handle the water side? Right. It's KKWD that we have to talk with, but who would be responsible for that piece? That communication, if we needed to make a change, and wouldn't it still be Public Works?
Public Works would be who would liaise specifically with the district.
Right.
It's an interesting relationship in that we don't really have any regulatory authority over the water district in that regard. They're a quasi-municipal agency, but we don't exercise any regulatory authority over them. We do know from just in terms of how the district operates that they, as much as our own Public Works, are constantly, upgrading and assessing their infrastructure for these types of impacts. I don't know that we necessarily have to spell that out and tell them to do what they're doing. But
just if it changes and they stop doing what they're doing, then we need to call them out, right? So that's why I think it's still important, even though that group may not be specifically responsible to run water lines.
We can have this as still keep it as its own strategy for water, but instead of putting Public Works as a responsible party, they would just leave the water district as the responsible party for assessing. You can mirror the strategy, but just assign it to the water district.
Okay.
The only problem I have is we have, like you said, we have no power over that. So I'd rather have assign something where we're working with the water district. We're trying to influence them, whatever it might be. We're changing, we're going to do all the sewer work down here along Mills Road. We want you, while we're there, the reason why we're doing it is because of groundwater rise. I want you guys to do your water lines at the same time. Something like that. We need to have some. And
I think we have in elsewhere. It's a common practice that we do, that we coordinate our infrastructure replacements at the same time, so that we don't wind up, rebuilding the same road, 2-3 times.
So we could just make both the policy and strategy list water and wastewater infrastructure, and then have the parties be Public Works and KKWD. Or-
Yeah,
yeah.
that's fine. You can do it that way. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, just add the water district in and
Right.
include wastewater and public water both in
Right.
the same
That'll work.
strategy.
That'll work.
Yep.
That's good.
Because at the end of the day, if they don't do anything about it, then we would have to take action as a town, right?
Right. The
And who
town
be
would
the
have
lead?
to lean on them.
Exactly. It's not, it shouldn't happen.
So, the next strategy, we're talking about protecting, this is protecting and supporting marine resource industry. This is, we had just talked about this reduction of the flow of nitrates. So this was in one of the Conservation Commission item ones.
Yep.
And I think we had talked about this expansion of sewer service areas in areas adjacent to nearshore waters. And so as we just got done talking about this policy, we may just consider adding in that language about nearshore waters as far as where that expansion area is, that sewer service
Okay.
area.
Right. That's fine.
Okay. All right.
Is near shore one word, 2 words?
It looks
I've
like one.
seen
it.
Not getting the little
Yeah,
red line.
it's one here.
Is that a word?
Yeah, well, Google says it's a word, so
Near shore.
Must be.
Near shore.
I live near shore.
There's a nearshore software company.
Right.
Is there?
Must be a word.
So the next one that we have comments from Public Works is on the special assessments or impact fees. And this is something, that we do already. And so the suggestion is just to continually reevaluate the rate of impact fees and user fees. Because this is something that we already do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sounds good.
I think
Says
we
that's
had
a duplicate.
Yeah, I think we had identified a duplicate strategy.
Okay.
It's someplace else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then this
But what,
strategy.
but we have a goal, we have a policy, we have a goal, reduce solid waste and
Yeah,
the
this one
policy.
here,
So what are we
reduction.
going to, if we eliminate it here, what are we doing?
Eli, do you remember where we had?
no, what
we
I've
had
been doing is I just write the word duplicate, and then
Mhm.
later this week I'm going to be doing a comprehensive look
Mm-hmm.
through the whole thing, and so I just haven't done that yet.
Okay, great.
It's
Thanks.
more of a note for myself. It may stay if I don't find the duplicate.
Okay.
Okay,
Got it. Yeah. And then the next one with notes was here just on the maintain, invest in town roads, ditches, streams, culverts, drainage, as well as capacity to accommodate pedestrians. This one says remove the Board of Selectmen from that.
Yeah.
However,
We're
it
not-
uses it
Well-
says maintain, invest
Yeah,
in town roads.
yeah,
But
the invest.
Yeah, but Public Works comes to the town with a proposal
Yeah,
and a budget
Yeah.
every year
Okay,
that gets negotiated. So it's really their initiative, I
Right.
Yeah.
think.
that's right.
Okay.
They bring that forward as part of their capital improvements.
okay.
And that was it for
Excellent.
Public Works feedback.
Way to go. Harbor Master.
All right. All right, Harbor Master. So some of these were, so just a couple of notes here. These were sent to, both Chris and actually that's Jamie Houts in the Kennebunk River.
Oh, my fault.
Chris Mayo is over in Cape Porpoise. And so some of these are just comments that, on some of the strategies, and I don't think there's any suggested changes, but them just commenting that these were ongoing and successful policies that were already in place. Same thing here with this identification and assessing appropriate sites for aquaculture. Just, I think, this is a comment of support for that.
Who's SCC?
I believe that's the is there a shellfish?
Yeah,
Oh, right.
shellfish. Yeah, commission. Yeah,
Thank you.
And so that is now going to also include the Conservation Trust.
correct.
Oh,
Right.
got it.
Right,
It was in their strategy.
right. Yep. Since a lot of that's their property.
Good.
And then, this, and again, I don't know that this needs to show up as an actual strategy, but again, these are just some comments that, there's a need for additional parking at Government Wharf. And so, but I think this is it's a good, it's a good strategy to keep.
Mhm.
And I don't know that we need to create a strategy around signage, parking signage.
No.
No, I agree.
So then just some comments about pump outs here, just, note, so we know Kennebunkport Marina now has a pump out station, that they maintain and operate for the public in the river. And also that, if you all don't know, but as part of the Cape Porpoise Pier reconstruction project, there will be a pump out installed as part of that project as well. So boat pump outs in both of those locations. And that's that for Harbor Master.
Sweet.
Yeah, pump outs available for both commercial and.
Yes, those are publicly, publicly accessible ones.
Planning board.
All right. Planning board. Oops, too many. All right.
Pass the things to you, Werner.
That's right. Yes. Yes, there was a number of strategies here that planning board, felt that didn't fall within, the scope of what they regularly do. And so there was just some exchange of departments or groups here. So, and that's what these two strategies are as far as another conservation, and the Cape Porpoise Archaeological Alliance.
If you're good, we're good.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So next here, minimize impacts of development, human activities on natural resources. So we're talking within the rural growth area require subdivisions and commercial developments maintain open space. And their language suggestion is just within the designated rural area. I think it's just some semantics.
What's the designated rural area?
That would be on the growth maps, that we use, the growth management map.
It's a subset of the growth area?
No, it's not a subset. Well, yes. Well, let me back up.
It's not exclusively.
Right. Yeah, it's in the, well, the rural area is its own kind of area
Right.
for the distribution of growth permits, as well
So maybe-
as your transition and growth.
Right. So growth
So maybe
really
the
should have
quote
been
should be around rural area, within the designated quote,
That's it.
rural area,
Yeah, that's right.
unquote.
Yes. Yeah, not quote around within.
Yeah, right.
So,
But the comment was, make it apply everywhere, not just in the second part of that.
so or remove the rural area and make, yeah, so there's two options there. Within a designated rural area, or remove rural area and apply it everywhere.
Doesn't it already?
No,
No.
I don't think so. Does it?
Well, I think in some subdivisions, they're required to keep a certain percentage of open space.
Well, and that's all part of the subdivision process.
Okay.
They start
Yeah.
with that. Yeah.
Okay.
But commercial development, we don't have that requirement, right?
No,
I'm
we
having a
don't
hard
have
time
we
even
don't.
reading this already.
Oh, can you make it bigger? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's a lot better. Thank you.
Here,
Yeah, if you can close the tools menu on the right side, that might. give it a-
yeah, here we go. Let me try this. It's maybe a little bit of a cleaner version here. Is that better?
Didn't change.
Didn't change on our end.
Just,
Oh,
I feel like
gosh.
I'm at the eye doctor.
just,
I can't read the last line.
Yeah.
oh, just close the tools on the right.
Here, I'll reshare the actual
So I think this comes down to, do we want to limit this to just the rural area that we have identified on the growth area map, or do we want to include this in the whole town?
and if that's a whole town, then you just say require subdivisions and commercial development to maintain open space, and just get rid of that within a rural growth
Yeah.
area. I mean, that's fine too.
Because the strategy, the goal applies to every place, not just.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'd say everywhere.
I get rid of rural growth.
So how do they do that? How do we do that with commercial development now?
So there's not there's not a specific designated open space requirement like what you have with where we don't tend to have a lot of new commercial development,
Right.
and so our
Right.
where the standards have really been developed have been more around your subdivision development.
Right.
So
Some
why wouldn't we have a standard before the fact than after a problem?
No,
Some-
you do have a general number that's in the land use table, as it relates to lots, but there isn't we don't have like separate specific open space performance standards for commercial development, if that makes sense, like what we do for
Yeah, I guess I hear what you're saying, but I don't
Yeah.
know why. I don't know why we don't. That's what I don't understand.
and what I'm saying is that I think part of the reason is that there just hasn't been a lot of that type of new large scale commercial development. It's not like we have
Yeah,
industrial
we have crappy
parks.
land. We have rocks and
Well, and we're not close to
Yeah.
Route 1 or
Yeah.
95 that would
but
typically generate that.
so it would seem very important then, in the absence of any rules, that we should encourage in commercial development open space to the greatest extent practicable.
Yeah,
So
and I think that
The use is allowed in whatever, but instead of paving the whole place over,
And
maybe.
And I think we're saying that where the suggestion was to just get rid of the words within the rural growth area and just start the sentence with require that
Okay,
subdivisions
fine.
and
That sounds
commercial
good.
developments
Good resolution.
Okay, let's do that.
All right. Moving along, support forestry and agricultural uses activities such as agritourism, backyard chickens, farms, farm stands, firewood sales. This was another swap out planning board with the planning department.
Yeah.
And then some of these other ones here, planning board, and just wanted to make sure, and obviously we would be working with them, but they just wanted planning department added to those.
That's great.
So, this one, and I think, yeah, we talked about, this is another conservation commission shared one, identify opportunities where we can identify areas for marsh migration. That was another one, a joint one with Conservation Commission.
Okay.
Let's see. Oops, excuse me. And then this was add planning department again, which we'd already would be involved. And then we moved some things around. This is a recommendation on reduction of width standards. And we moved that just from the transportation section into the minimization of climate change impacts. So
Great.
As long as a fire truck can still get down.
yeah.
Ladder truck.
Likewise with these other strategies as well. We just moved them. So they're all grouped together. Added a planning department.
You're gonna be working Saturdays.
And then, allowing marine resources, same thing, added planning department. This year, we had talked about this one before, the establishment of community supported fisheries, that we were going to remove that strategy. Just there's no room at either of our commercial waterfronts for that activity. And no additional comments on any of these other strategies from the board. Next one, we had review and make recommendations for off-street parking for residential use. So we moved this to the housing section. And then likewise, we have these other strategies. Same thing, this one is reduction of widths for multiple buildings. This is also a climate change, very similar to the one we just talked about. Also moved those, again, group them in with the housing.
So we'll have some policies here without an action. Is that what I'm seeing?
No, these are,
Or
oh, I see what you're saying. You're wondering if we've eliminated the strategies and just left a policy with nothing in it.
yeah, I mean, it's okay, I think, to have a strategy repeated if it's serving two purposes.
Yeah, and we can check that to make sure that doesn't occur. That that we don't wind up with an empty, with an empty policy. That's a good point. Yeah.
Okay.
This was the planning board suggestion, right? I mean, it's if you don't have anything in there and you feel that this does offer a reasonable or even important way to achieve the policy, then I would, and you could leave it there.
And I think it's more just a matter of the organization of it. It's not about whether it's not whether we keep it or not. It's whether it's just where we stick it.
Right.
Just so you know, I just took a look. There are other strategies for each of those policies.
Okay, good.
Okay, good.
Yep, so we're not leaving that with nothing in it. This All right, mitigate vulnerability to natural hazards, human-made hazards, and climate change. This was a question on whether or not we had any existing strategies that incorporated tree and natural design elements as a way to mitigate climate change hazards. Eli, what did we decide with this one? I know you and I had talked a little bit about what we were going to do with this piece.
Yeah, I'm looking for those notes.
I mean, I think it's a good point he raised.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think that we were going to look for, if it wasn't already included, that it would be included in the future land use planning for climate change goal.
Okay.
That's right. That's right.
Because
Yep.
just because the hazard mitigation section generally is not planning board type stuff, it's more emergency management.
Right. Right. These are typically more emergency management elements and infrastructure items. When you're
So move it to future land use.
yes,
comment?
yeah, that's right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Works for me.
So at the
And-
bottom there, you can see that goal plan for a changing climate. It would fit, if it doesn't exist already, that's where it would go.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. In this one here. Yeah, if it didn't have a place, then that's where it would
Okay.
go, right here. All right, and that's what we had for planning board comments. And yeah, so then just looking at our agenda, and so what we had on number 7 was that we had good support from all the other departments. That's Parks and Recreation, Town Clerk, Finance, and Public Health with their strategies, and they didn't provide back any written comments, but they were all supportive of what was sent to them.
Good.
Good.
Thank you both for doing all that
Yeah.
work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So we had a last minute ad. If everyone's ready to continue and just move
Yep.
forward. So as you all well, I say as you all know, but maybe you all don't necessarily know, but whenever there are amendments to the town's land use ordinance that are brought forward, growth planning will look at those and will report back to the selectmen as to whether or not an amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And so we do have a number of amendments that are going forward. As I looked over the comp plan, I don't necessarily find anything that we don't really get into issues around signage or free speech type elements. But what we do have that's going in front of the voters here for June is we have an amendment to the land use ordinance that primarily deals with regulating how content gets regulated on signage, and a lot of this ties back into a number of years ago. The Supreme Court weighed in on municipal sign regulations as it related to the content of the material versus what communities typically manage, and that's your kind of space and bulk and placement type standards. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what we know is that, due to interpretations of the First Amendment, towns don't have an awful lot of say in terms of the regulation of content. And so these amendments that we have essentially recognize, that, we have different standards, and we have had on the books for quite some time, space and bulk standards for signage that shows up on commercial properties. So it's pulled some of the language out that deals with the specifics of content. And then what the town attorney, so I worked with the town attorney on the development of this. We recognized that we didn't have an adequate standard just dealing with signage on private property. And so that was an element that got added in. And I can bring up that language if you all want to take a look at it.
But Warner, how did this come about? Why the change?
Why the change?
Yeah.
So, I mean, call this one of those housekeeping items that's been a long time coming that needed to be done. And I think the other thing that really came up and where this kind of came to light was, in the past presidential elections, you had a lot of signage that showed up where, we got called into question regarding content. And what we knew, excuse me, from having discussions with the town attorney was that we didn't have authority to regulate and deal with specific content. I mean, these were elements of free speech. So to answer your question, it's something that's been an item that that towns everywhere need to deal with. But I think the last set of elections really brought that issue more to light.
So is it the content or the size of the signs? It sounds like the Jim McMahon ordinance.
It
Can't
was.
hear you.
Can't hear you.
So what it was is it was content. Content was part of it, but also just recognition that we didn't necessarily have a standard that dealt with signage on private property. So most of our sign regs either dealt with sort of temporary signage, that dealt with, hey, the property's for sale, or something like that. And then the commercial signage was dealing with goods and services available on premises. And so that's where you see some of this language that gets struck out, because that's content based. So what came out of this then, so for those that aren't familiar, the way that warrant language works is that, strikeout, it's done in a strikeout and underline format. Things that are struck out is language that's proposed to be struck out. Underlines are the replacement language. And so, as I said, we didn't really have anything that worked for residential properties. And so, in conjunction with council, we have now a calculation for number and location of signage, for private property as well as commercial property. And I'll just get into that here. We also took the opportunity to, there were some other housekeeping items related to election signage that was town attorney had found was inconsistent with state statute. So that's what some of this language is here, that talks about just temporary signs placed within a public right-of-way right here shall conform to the provisions of 23 MRS. And then we got into temporary signage is placed outside of the public right of way. this was a fun exercise that we went through here.
So again, the signs that I put up won't be allowed anymore?
No, that's not the case. So what we get into here is, so I'll get down into it. Arguably what the signage that you had before, Jim, there wasn't a category that allowed for that to begin with, but recognizing that it was a free speech issue and, likely outside of our purview, I mean, just as an example, knowing it had to get dealt with. So before, so again, this is just a minor change. We now classify commercial or residential versus non-residential. And what we've included now as well is a signage table for residential properties. And so this is signage, that could be placed on private property, and it gives you a space and bulk standard for that as well.
So if I run again, I can only have a sign that's 4 foot by 5 feet.
You can get this isn't this is permanent signage. This isn't elections. It's not election signage. Okay. So election signage would fall under this temporary, the temporary allowances here. Temporary signs placed outside of the public right of way. And so this is the standard that already had existed, but this is, this is the language that you have here.
So now it's 6 square feet.
Mhm.
6, right, that's correct.
So the sign that I put up won't be allowed anymore.
The temporary sign, that's a single sign. That's the size of a single sign.
So the one I had on Goose Rocks in the log cabin wouldn't be allowed anymore.
The one that made of a big door? No.
Yeah, no, that was on private property. I'm talking about the one that I had on the corner. It was a sheet of plywood.
So that election signage, that was an election signage, would have to then, as election signage would have to comply with the MRS standards, the state standards.
Which is what?
Yeah.
This is election signage on which property? Private property or town right of ways? It's two different things, right?
That was town right of way.
Where you have more authority to restrict.
That's correct, yes.
And on your private property,
you now have a designation that allows for some permanent signage on private property.
So what's that about? Where I don't quite understand. If I'm a doctor and I'm operating out of my residence, this tells me what I can put up permanently.
Well, again, that's not we're not doing anything based on content. Right. So let's say that you had a political or religious statement that you wanted to have permanently affixed on your property.
Okay.
This now provides a standard for that.
Okay. And what's that standard? Can you go to that?
Yeah. That is, so that's this standard here, the signage for residential properties, and that's this one permanent sign per residential property, 20 square feet. You get up to a 20 square foot sign.
Approximately 4 feet by 5.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that large for a permanent sign for my next door neighbor to say Hogan sucks?
I think it is.
Hogan sucks.
Well, I'm just saying. I have great neighbors, but
what if he says Hogan's a great guy?
Yeah. So we've gone through.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, we've had one of the other issues with this was attempting to find, to come to a size, that is not too dissimilar from the non-residential standards that we have for signage. Again, remember, we're trying to balance, the practices with, with having some equal representation and allowances here, and not necessarily designating too much between the two entities. And so,
Yeah, I guess I don't understand that. I mean, if you're looking for comments from
at
this board,
point,
I think there's a big difference between what I want to see in a residential neighborhood, given people's free speech rights. Hold on, I'm losing my battery. Sorry.
and this, so what we have tonight is more whether or not this is something that's addressed by the comprehensive plan or not. And I mean, we haven't addressed ever in the comp plan, a question of signage.
Do we identify what the definition of a sign is? I mean, if I have
Signs are
an address on
identified.
my garage door, does that count as a sign?
No, so those, so things like your address, things like that, that's not what this is, that's not what we're dealing with here. This is where you start getting into these things that are exempt. Like for instance, flags, aren't part of this. Traffic, control signs, informational, numeric.
So I got a 50-foot elect me flag next time.
What?
That's good to know.
Signs where you post your property, private, no trespassing, those aren't part of this, because we recognize too, the no trespassing, folks often put those on, trees or fence posts, and so that's what, we added that in as an exemption. So
I can't put signs on my own trees.
you can post your property with these signs on trees. They're exempt from that. So this has been, we've gone over this with the Board of Selectmen, and again, it's been gone through, with the town attorney to make sure that, this puts us in good standing with the Supreme Court's interpretations on on free speech. So, as you know, so what we do with any LUO amendments is that we just provide to the selectmen some commentary on whether or not it's consistent with the comp plan. This one was one that, we struggled a little bit with, because again, the comp plan doesn't really, our current plan,
Right.
we don't get into this, this level of discussion, but I'm happy to take any type of comments to the board, on this.
Well, if we start putting up 4x4 signs all over the place, it'll be in the next comp plan. I don't think most people in town would want permanent signs of that size in a residential neighborhood.
And it's not, it's not something that, again, it was more a question of what do we do with, again, we didn't have any kind of an allowance, and we recognized that without anything like that, we had to address it in some fashion.
Paul, I don't think it's just permanent signs. I think people complained about when I ran for school board, they just didn't like my signs. So,
No, that's a different section, Jim.
yeah, it is a different section, but it's in there, and they just, oh well.
But yeah, so that's the question 3. So then question 5 And this is a separate question, but it's also related to signage. Can you all still see this one?
Mhm.
Okay. All right. I didn't know if it switched over. And this also deals with an amendment that would allow for the town to place internally lit signs on town-owned property. So the question had come up, and this is the language here. Essentially, what this is that this would allow for the town to have a permanent type message board set up at the fire station. That was the, departments had asked about having, a permanent sign as opposed to just, right now we use the, the mobile traffic control sign. And, this language would allow the town to put up an electronic, one where they would advertise events and things of that nature on a message board, but it would be an electronic one.
Mhm.
So that's what this amendment would allow. And it's narrowly focused for town-owned properties.
I think this is not consistent with the plan. We heard strongly from people in the from the North Street fire neighborhood which has been ongoing for 20 or 30 years, about preserving a neighborhood character there. And since all of the municipal facilities are in neighborhoods, not by design, that's just the way it happened. I think that moves, if I lived across the street from that, would I want to see an illuminated line seeing that the rec department is having an open gym night next Tuesday? I don't think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And I think both because of preserving the neighborhood feel for our neighborhoods and because of our commitments, we take credit for dark skies, and this is taking us in a different direction. If we had a municipal building, along Route 1 or something like that, that would be a different story.
I don't see an issue with the mobile one, to be honest with you, and it can be moved, especially if it snows or whatever. I don't have a problem with the mobile one.
No, they're looking for a permanent illuminated
I agree, yeah, and
in front of schools and,
yeah, what I'm saying is, I guess I agree with you. I prefer just to have a mobile.
I can't hear you, Jim.
I have no idea.
I think he said that he prefer the town just use the movable one.
Okay.
Has anybody complained about the movable one, Warner?
I'm not aware of any complaints related to it. It's more just I think just in terms of looking for options for messaging events to the public. That's a tool that's out there. Are the permanent electronic message boards that can be programmed and things of that nature. But I understand the comments that I'm hearing, with, as it relates to this. It's part of the reason why I separated the free speech signage into one question and put this one into a separate question. I anticipated this kind of, potential reaction.
So Werner, are we I'm trying to take notes here. Are we trying to take away a comment or information to the?
Yeah, we need to make a motion on whether these ordinance changes are consistent or not consistent with the growth, with the comprehensive plan. And it would be the current 2012 comprehensive plan. That's in authority, not what we've written.
Yeah.
So
right.
So I would just ask that whatever motions or statements that you make is that you do them separately. One for question 3 and one for question 5.
Yeah. So, I'm not sure I agree with you on that, Paul, but I could see where it's vague enough that we could end up putting signs at a whole bunch of different places that are public, and that may be less desirable. I think certainly a lit sign that had the ability to be changed for public safety messaging and so forth would be an advantage, and would probably look a lot nicer than the one that's the movable that gets moved around, which apparently no one's complained about.
Well, the reason no one complains about it is it's not permanent. So everybody realizes it's there for 15 days for the food drive and 20 days for this, and everybody says, "Oh, that's a good thing."
And every other week for posting your speed. So,
Right.
That's
So
a different.
anyways.
It's a different.
It's very different.
opinion.
how-
Different opinion.
The speed limit sign is very different.
What
So
they
let's-
used for, like, then the schools are gonna ask for them instead of their little signboards with
Right.
the letters saying, you know, varsity basketball game, Friday at 6, you know. Each school's gonna want one. I don't know, it could get out of control.
That's fine. Everybody can vote how they feel. Let's talk about the
Yeah.
number 3 first. Any concerns with that? I mean, I'm looking at the plan. The current plan talks about signs in 9 places. One
wow.
is under beaches, where it
Mhm.
says rights of way to the beach are marked with signs. One is under adequacy of beach facilities, that vandalism to signage has become a problem in the beach area, particular to
Mhm.
those signs posted for rights of way. So we're not talking about that, right,
Mm-mm.
Werner? We had a strategy to maintain, keep open, and ensure that designating signs are in a place for all public rights of way to tidal waters.
Mhm.
Okay. We had a strategy to work with Rachel Carson and law enforcement to enforce no trespassing signs banning watercraft and other motorized vehicles from the marsh. Strategy 6, under recognize, preserve Kennebunkport status as one of the 3 high-density vernal pool complexes in all of New England. Was work with DOT and Town Highway Department to accommodate known migratory crossings of endangered reptiles and amphibians. Sound familiar?
Mhm.
Place caution signs at appropriate sites.
Mhm.
Had one under implementation of promote and protect the availability of outdoor recreational opportunities. Mark and maintain signs indicating points of interest, parking, and public rights of way. And the town should continue to work to make it easier for first-time visitors to find their way around town to various signs, blah, blah, blah. So there's nothing I see here that really would say that question 3 is inconsistent.
I'll make a motion to say we're consistent.
Yeah.
On number
Okay.
3.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, any other discussion on it or second?
Second, good.
Okay, second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of question 3 as being consistent with comprehensive plans, please say aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed? Those abstain? Oh, Jim's muted, so that's why I need
Aye.
you're abstaining or are you?
Yep.
Okay. So you got that, Janet?
Yeah.
4 saying it's consistent and 1 abstain. Okay. Can you put her forward, please? Hey, Robin, you just have to unmute yourself.
Or when you come back, well, if If you're not hearing this. Okay.
Okay. So question
And
5.
pardon me, just to confirm, that was question 3 we just voted on.
That was question 3.
Great, okay, thank you.
So question 5, I'll take a motion on question 5 on whether it's consistent or whether it's not consistent. Whoever wants to make a motion.
And it's really not consistent, is it?
You making a motion, Jim, that's not consistent with the comp plan?
Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've ever talked about permanent signs that light up.
Yeah, we don't talk about signs that much. We certainly don't talk about lit signs. So it's whether or not, like the argument that Paul was making, that it's inconsistent with our town character or something to that extent.
Mhm.
But as far as our comp plan, it's not consistent, right? We haven't referred to it or talked about it or put it anywhere.
I'm sorry, Jim, I'm having a hard time understanding you.
Yeah,
Hard of
sorry.
hearing the first part.
As far as our current comp plan, we don't refer to it at all, right?
We don't talk about lit signs at all.
No,
So it's not, what's the term you were using?
consistent.
It's not consistent with our current plan.
Well, I would say it's not inconsistent.
Yeah, and the other
It's a hard
thing that
piece.
you could do is you could take a neutral position with it and just report to the selectmen that the comprehensive plan
Mhm.
does not, have any either supportive or non-supportive language associated with it. I think ultimately the intent here is just for growth planning to report, to the selectmen, since you all know the comp plan, better than any other board.
So I'll make a
motion. Well, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to say that it's inconsistent for the 2 reasons I stated, both of which are in the existing comprehensive plan. Of course, they don't reference signs, but the character of the neighborhood, I think, would be really impacted by a sign lit up all night in that neighborhood. There's been a balancing act for decades, and between the the commercial interests in the town and the village neighborhood interests. And while this isn't a specific pro-commercial, which is the traditional kind of debate that goes on with respect to that property, it's something that I wouldn't want in my neighborhood and I don't think the people in that neighborhood would want it, and I think it would be out of character for that neighborhood. And the second thing is we should be looking to minimize nighttime lights. We have had dark skies in our comp plan for decades. We say we're an origin community or whatever the language is, and you don't go around illuminating. You would try to minimize additional illumination if you believe in dark skies.
Paul, with reference to number 2, in the future, couldn't you just have a sign? I'm not saying I agree or disagree with the sign, but, couldn't we just say that the sign gets turned off when it becomes dark?
Well, then it doesn't do it. Illumination doesn't do any good. You don't need the illumination in the daytime.
The temporary sign is always flashing advertising stuff during the day.
Yeah, there'd be a bit.
That's my motion. That's my motion. Chairman?
Yeah. The only comment I would make, Paul, is that this is strictly town of Kennebunkport sign. It wasn't for commercial use.
No, I understand that.
Yeah,
No,
okay.
in terms of the character of that neighborhood specifically, that
Okay.
their apartments are talking about using. I think a permanent illuminated sign
Mhm.
would not be consistent with the goal that we have of preserving the neighborhood character of that neighborhood.
Right.
That's my motion.
Yep.
Dan, you should ask for a second before
Yep.
we have.
Is there a second?
I second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Paul,
Say aye, please. Paul?
Aye.
Aye.
Jim?
Oh,
Was that an aye?
no.
Okay. All those opposed? Aye. Jim? All those abstain?
Yep.
Okay. So it passes 3-1 that it's not consistent with the comprehensive plan, current 2012 comprehensive plan.
So we
Okay.
have three.
3 yea, 1 abstain, 1 no.
One no.
Right.
Correct. Got it. Okay. Great.
All right.
Thank
Hey, that's democracy at work.
Thank you
Appreciate
very much.
the discussion and the votes. You know,
All
imagine
right.
if they could do this in Washington.
Be great.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yep. Anything else on the agenda? Hey, Robin. There you go.
Hello. I'm sorry I got kicked off. I just wanted to back Paul up saying, I think, I know I'm late, but I just think that even the one down here at Goose Rocks where I live, it's kind of obnoxious. We do need it because people speed so much, but to have them all over town, not all over town, but anywhere, if you live near it, it's going to be an irritant. That's all.
Thank you, Robin.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
Great. Well, thank you. I have what we need to report. So thank you.
Okay.
Terrific.
Very good.
And thanks for agreeing for this to meet this one meeting, or you've got 3 back-to-back meetings. But this is really helpful to make sure that we get our comp plan out on time. So I think we're scheduled to meet again next week. And that's our hurry up and wait. That's going to be our last meeting. I think for a little while anyway. That's the final time, and Tom and Liz will join us. They've been working on finishing out the implementation table, so you're going to see some new things. That's the part where the prioritization is listed for each strategy and a few other things that are required for the comp plan state review office.
Okay.
So we'll have a full meeting, but they'll be in attendance, and then after that it'll be in the select board's hands. So
Okay. So when did the select board get that information? The
So-
following week?
yeah, so it'll be excuse me. And if you want to attend the select board meeting and provide support or comment or whatever, that would of course be welcome and great. So the select board will be reviewing it on their meeting May 26th, and then signing the finalized plan on June 9th. And then it's going to be the next day driven up to Augusta, because we want to make sure that we are inside the deadline period. So
So
Who's driving?
Who's paying the
Who's
gas
taking
money?
it?
He's got an electric car, if you can get
Yeah.
a recharge.
It should be in a steel attaché case.
So Dan, at some point, so once we get through that piece, there is a form I think that we'll need you to autograph.
Okay.
So we'll be in touch in terms of figuring out what that wants to look like.
Yeah, very good.
So we'll see you next week. But then I think we're not scheduled to meet that first week in June. Is that right? June 7th. I guess we don't have an agenda for June 7th. So
Okay.
yeah. So we like.
Let's-
Well, if there were some change that the Board of Selectmen said they wanted,
Right.
We'd
Right.
have to bring.
we should
we'd have
meet on
to-
the 7th to discuss it and either agree with it or say we're going our own way and
Sure.
get trounced in November.
Sure. So we'll keep it on the calendar, but
Yes,
as
keep
of,
it on the
as of
calendar.
now, there's no agenda, just so you know that, but absolutely, yeah. Yeah. Great, thanks.
All right, thank
Okay,
you all.
thank you, thank you.
Thanks for joining today.
All right, thank you.
Night, everyone.
Good
Good night,
all.
everyone.
Do we need a motion to end?
We have to
Oh,
motion.
yeah.
I motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. I second. All approve. Hey, 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 hey.
Hey,
I think those who left already approved.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
We can't end without quorum. See ya.
See ya.